Jay-Z once rapped, "Men lie, women lie, numbers don't." Today we'll be talking about the perception process, or how we assign meaning to our environment. Now, ancient thinkers sat around and thought about how their perceptions, their senses, deceived them or lied to them. And so they thought about the faculties of their own thought process. And so we have philosophy as lovers of wisdom. And today we often rely on our mental faculties, our ability to conceptualize our environment. And we surprisingly trust our senses very little compared to our mental faculties, knowing that our senses and our perceptions might deceive us at times. And so, if we take a look at this simple diagram here to exemplify the perception process, we can see that at its broadest, it's how we assign meaning to our environment. Now, if we look at this bottle of red liquid, we will most likely assume that it is hot sauce of some sort, that it is spicy as well. And then we might even go as far as interpretation to already make assumptions. I don't like spicy food, or I do like spicy food. We might go on to say that it is a specific type of hot sauce, Tapatio or Tabasco, for instance, and make different evaluations about whether we think this is a quality substance or not. And so, if we go back a little bit and we slow down, we might think that this is just a bottle of red liquid and it is perceived as such. But it might not necessarily be hot sauce, and it might not necessarily be hot at all, or even available for consumption. And so, perception processes, as we study the perception process, really asks us to slow down and back up our train towards interpretation or evaluation. Now, we often look at something, or we look at a series of things and go straight to interpretation. But we are asked here to slow down and think about the perception process: selection, organization, and then interpretation. And so, selection is paying attention to something. And organization is a framework that you fit this topic or thing or subject into. And then interpretation is that ultimate evaluation. Now, oftentimes we go straight to interpretation or evaluation. All right. We pick a movie and we say we don't like that movie, or we do like that movie. But we might back up and ask why we selected that movie amongst many others. And then we might go to a next step and think about how we have framed this film in relation to other films, how we have organized the content of the film. And then we might go towards interpretation based on that framework, which stems from the original selection process. And so, persuasion, we're connecting perception with persuasion here. When we engage in perception, we are almost always engaging in perception based on our perception process. I perceive the world, I perceive my environment to be this way. And so I will move forward with acts of persuasion in an effort to change that reality, or to change that environment in some way. And so let's remember, persuasion at its broadest is the act of influencing others. This is an act of power. You might not have a lot of money, you might not have a lot of status or a fancy car, but you might have the power to persuade others to think differently, or to do things differently. And so this is a form of cultural capital and a form of power. And so there's almost always a job out there in sales. because if you are good at selling things, then you are good at generating your own profit, oftentimes generating that profit for a company and also for yourself. And that is the reason there is almost always a job out there, because you are doing that hard earned work to make a profit for you and others. So, once again, persuasion, an act uh, of power, and also a philosophical act that starts with perception. And so, before we go out there and attempt to change the world, we first look out there in the world and recognize what needs to be changed according to our own readings. And so I think this gets lost oftentimes as a conceptual and a philosophical endeavor, thinking about not only what should be changed about the world, but then how you will go about doing that. And so this is called praxis. This is theory and action in practice. And so persuasion is how you respond to an environment in order to change perception. So once again, we back up and slow down. We don't see everything equally. We enter a crowded room. We enter a supermarket. Uh, we don't see everything equally. Certain things are supposed to pop out at us. We walk into a classroom and the teacher is up there in the front of the room. We might notice the teacher at first. We walk in to a supermarket and certain products are emphasized or on sale, and so they pop out at us. And so these elements are framed to draw our attention. And so oftentimes we select those cues because they are presented to us in a certain way. But we might look for our friends in a classroom, or we might look for that empty seat. And so we are selecting what we are paying attention to. Or we might look for those products that we went to the supermarket to get. And so those jump out at us, even though they might be tucked away in the back or on the bottom shelf. Next time you're doing anything, you might take a look around and think about what draws your attention, why it draws your attention, and if it was designed to do that. If you go to the supermarket, you'll often find that sweet cereal placed on the lower to middle shelves. And so children walk through the aisles and see those products. Meanwhile, the more healthier products, the granola type products, are oftentimes at the top of the shelf. And so they draw the attention of the adults that happen to be walking down that aisle with the children. And so a selection. What do we pay attention to? We might ask ourselves why we are paying attention to certain cues. Or organization. Organization is very important here as we move towards perception. If we looked at almost anything, we can interpret it in various ways. And so the way we interpret various subjects and topics is often based on our organizational schema or framework, how we are understanding any given topic or subject. And so this is the framework. If you looked at the environment, you could look at the environment from a compassionate standpoint, from a standpoint of reciprocity between human and natural environments. Right? And you will come up with a certain interpretation. You might look at the environment from a business model and look at it in terms of profits. And then you will interpret the same exact subject, the same exact topic in a completely different manner based on the schema or the framework that you are using to analyze the topic or subject. Similarly, you might look at a film and note that it is a quality, as a good film, or it is a bad film, according to a certain framework or schema. If the film is profitable and you're looking at it from a profit standpoint, then will be clear that if the movie did well in the box office, it is a quality movie. Now, you might be looking at it from a feminist standpoint and examining how the film represents women and relationships between men and women, or gendered representations in general, and come up with yet another interpretation of the film based on the framework. So organization, very important in the perception process, as it leads directly to interpretation, assigning meaning to a subject based on the framework. If we look at words, symbols, and labels, oftentimes encourage us to look at certain topics and subjects and things in specific ways. So we might pause now and think about just a label or title or a word that encourages us to look at a thing or a topic in a specific way. And so those levels of interpretation are oftentimes built into the symbolic system that we use to describe the thing. Kanye West's record label a while back came out with Good Music, and that was the title of the record label. I thought this was interesting. Good Music is telling us that this is a record label that produces quality music. It's also an acronym, Getting Out Our Dreams. He also made a reference to God, that it was God music, but he added an O to make it good music. But all the while, we are encouraged to accept the interpretation of the music that this record label puts out as quality or as good. So we have good music here. So interpretation. I encourage us to slow down when thinking about the perception process and not go right to evaluation or interpretation. Think about how we are interpreting what we are talking about, and then also why we are even talking about this subject or topic. Selection, organization, and interpretation. Next, we go to retrieval. And so we retrieve information, we recall information, and we recall those past levels of perception. Oh, good music. Every time I've heard a song that was produced by this record label, I enjoyed it. And so I am recalling that information based on past perceptions. Our memories serve us well, and our memories do not serve us well. We'll talk a little bit in a moment here about we design or we recall information that places us in a favorable light. And so we tend to think that our memory serves us well. Oftentimes, we tend to think that our memory serves us better than it actually does. And so, selective retrieval. What information do you choose to remember? What information is selected out of all of that information that you received in the past? And so once again, we attach the perception process to our own levels of perception. You're a terrible person, says the cartoon. How do you do it? And the other cartoon character says selective memory. Right? They don't remember the times when they behaved in a pejorative or negative way. Only those times when they acted positively or helped others. And so selective memory. We all have selective memory. Once again, think about what types of memories you select and retrieve. We might think that we can remember a line in a movie or a theme song from a television show that we haven't watched in 10 years. Yet we might have trouble remembering what we ate for breakfast yesterday. And so it's interesting how we remember certain things and don't remember other things. This shows that we don't remember everything on an equal playing field, just like we don't perceive the world equally. Certain things jump out at us, and then we quickly move to organizing them in some sort of framework and interpreting what these memories mean. Negativity bias. We just tend to place more attention on negative information. And if you look at societal text across the globe, you will often find a saying that says if it bleeds, it reads. And so we sensationalize negative events and we mark them, and they tend to stick out. Think about how many good things happen in a day. Think about how many um, neutral things happen in any given day. Yet, if you turn on the news or look at the paper, you will tend to see negative events highlighted, oftentimes on the front page in bold print. And so, if it bleeds, it reads. We often pay more attention to negative acts, heinous endeavors. Now, this is called the negativity bias. Maybe it's interesting. Maybe this can be seen in a positive manner. Maybe we tend to pay more attention to things that are negative because they stick out, and we mark them as outside of the norm. And so we pay attention to these things because we don't want them to happen again. Nevertheless, we tend to pay more attention to negative information. We also tend to be overly simplistic. And so this is called the simplicity bias. We overestimate effective communication. We would just like to think that other people know what we are saying. You know what I'm saying? Because at the end of the day, we want to be on the same page and communicate with people. So you know what I'm saying. And at the end of the day, are emblematic of the simplicity bias and overestimation of effective communication. You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying? We're all most likely guilty of this in some way. And if we weren't, it might be hard to make it through a day, because you just have to assume at certain times that other folks know what you're saying. Remember, language at the end of the day is inadequate. And so it will never fully represent that internal state or the external reality. And so words and language in itself are reductive, and they're symbolic symbols for very complicated feelings, emotions, and things. So simplicity bias, overestimate effective communication. Self-serving bias, lastly, is what we will discuss here. We view information that places us in a favorable light. So, interestingly enough, seemingly somewhat contradictory to the negativity bias, the self serving bias is we tend to remember things that place us in a favorable light. Even if we remember negative events, we tend to remember them as how they affected us positively. Now, this goes to our last concept here, and where we will start our next lecture off: identity and self. So, our self concept. And our self concept is a relatively stable set of perceptions we hold about ourselves. And so, who am I? We might pause and take a look at the pond or in the mirror and ask ourselves, who am I? What is my identity? Why am I here? And what am I doing? And so, when we are doing this, we are engaging in reflecting on our own identity, our own concepts of self. Now, I like this concept of concept. And so our self concept is not really our self, but more so it's our concept. And so we'll move here even more philosophical and ask ourselves, am I more who I think I am, or am I more who others think I am? And then we might add a third level on that. Who am I really? And so this is our self concept, not necessarily ourself, but our concept about ourselves. And so things like self awareness, things like self reflexivity, and self esteem come into play here. And so when we think about our own actions and our own experiences, we tend to remember information that places us in a favorable light. If something happened that was quality and good, we tend to take credit If it was bad, then it wasn't our fault. And we might blame the situation or we might blame others. And so we might think about this when we think back about how we perceive past experiences and when we're talking with others and how they perceive past experiences. And so all the while, we are dealing with our identities, our histories, our cultures, and our experiences, and our self concept, how we view ourselves and how we view ourselves in relation to the world. Thank you.